All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in again. So, this is the second part of my Send Summit recap. So, tonight, it's tonight while I'm recording this. So, you'll probably get this in the morning if I can stay awake to edit it, or finish the post at least. But this is going to be a recap of Thursday's events primarily. We talked about Wednesday. Wednesday and Tuesday. If you haven't seen that already, go check it out. Some pretty cool things there. So, we're going to go through Thursday. So, kind of in the same format of yesterday, yesterday's post, we're going to just go through the events and talk about my key takeaways. So, first thing today, we had Mass and Liturgy of the Hours and Adoration. Thankfully, I was able to make it today. Didn't have any morning meetings. It was really just quite beautiful. Again, same thing as yesterday. Just amazing to see so many people there. Um, just so many individuals that I've gotten to know a little bit over the past days. And, you get to know what they do and the incredible things that they're all about. And you just see them there humbly kneeling in Mass and praying devoutly. And it's just kind of like, it's very simple, but it's really, really quite inspiring, honestly. At least it was for me. So then we have Mass. And then we go back to the hotel. Actually, before I go back to that, I want to point out a couple things that I thought were interesting from the sermon. So the priest is actually somebody who spent 7 years working before he became a priest, before he kind of entered the discerning phase and into seminary. And during that 7 years, he actually had co-founded a tech company. And the biggest takeaway I had from all this and from his sermon was he had this really amazing zinger that he came out with towards the end of the sermon. I had my notebook set away, but as soon as I heard this, I immediately reached for my notebook to write it down. He said, "Prayer is a time multiplier." And when we make time for prayer, God effectively makes up for that time somewhere else. He might help us, cancel a meeting or get to our destination a little quicker so that we make up for the time that we spent in prayer. So don't ever be afraid to put prayer in. And it was just super, like, it really, really hit home for me. And I would encourage everybody else to try that, to just really focus on putting the prayer in the first part of the day, giving God that first time, and really trusting in Him that He'll help you achieve what you're trying to achieve in that day. So after Mass, we go back to the hotel. We have a bit of a snack. And then we do some breakout sessions. So there was 3 different sessions. I believe the first one was on Catholic leadership with Peter Rex. Some of you might know he has a company called, I believe it's called Rex to this day still. And it's basically like a real estate tech company. He's really like kind of an online guy, quite interesting. Got to meet him. That was really cool. I did not attend that event, but then there was another one about this one other breakout session about this individual's journey to space. There's an astronaut there. I did not go to that one. I think I was really interested in the space topic and just hearing his story, but I felt really called to go to the final one, which I ended up going to, which was the need for faith tech. So that was a panel with the CTO of Hallow, Eric, as well as Exodus 90 founder Jamie, who we talked about yesterday, and Sonder Rash, founder of Safety Wing. So Safety Wing is the only one of those that's not a pure play faith tech company. It's just tech company run by Catholic, and that panel was moderated by Andrew DeBerry from Google X. I believe he's Google X Factory, and he's also involved in Arithmetia. Look it up; it's really interesting. Company that scans your investments to make sure you're not investing in anything that's against the Catholic social teachings. I had a couple really big takeaways from that session, and I'll go through one of each of the panelists, and then I'll mention a final one at the end. So Jamie from Exodus 90 shared how important it is to spend time contemplating your tech or your company. And what I think he was trying to get at, really, at least this is my takeaway, was you got to contemplate what is this really going to work? He mentioned a number of examples, but really what it comes down to is another way of looking at product market fit. Is this something that truly meets a need of people? He talked a lot about the human experience and ensuring that you kind of keep in mind what you're building, and the kind of, he said, scale it down to the smallest level to kind of imagine what the impact is. But just having that idea of contemplation in business is, I think, I mean, we're faced with a lot of decisions. Usually we make them pretty quickly. There might be some bigger decisions. We're all about data and things like that. But having that kind of contemplation mentality, or at least a habit of doing that, I think can be quite powerful. So that really stood out to me. Sonder had a really good point. It sounded really silly when he initially said it, but it's kind of sunk in over time, and I realized why it's so important, which was, make sure you're not doing evil. Again, sounds simple, but needs to be said. And then focus, as the second part of that, focus on ensuring that what you're doing will actually be good if you succeed. So if you succeed at your mission, will the overall actual outcome be good? Because a lot of people, they think it will be, but then once they get to the end, like, they've achieved, quote unquote, achieved their mission, and in the end, it's not actually a good thing. So really think that through. That was his encouragement. And then Eric at Hallow pointed out the importance of building tech that doesn't really become a vice, right? They're building Hallow. It's a prayer app. So, how could it be vice? His example was meditation apps, technology apps. A lot of these, they focus on the metric of, internally, of getting as many minutes on the app as possible, right? That's their kind of metric of success. But it's like, well, we don't want people being, more addicted to their phones. Obviously, we want them to pray, but in the reality is, they're not praying with Hallow, right? Like, Hallow is helping them. It's kind of an aid. It's a guide on this journey, but really, this is just like, we're just here as a support staff. We don't want them to be, addicted to the phone. So if you build a tech company, it's probably important to keep that in mind, right? Like, these technologies can be very addicting. Just being on your phone can be addicting. So you need to be conscious of that. And I thought that's a really big challenge. It applies in particular for tech, but it can apply for anything, right? If you sell alcohol, or if you're a distillery or something, you might want to make sure you have kind of in mind the good of the human in the end, right? Obviously, you want to make business, you want to make sales and do business well, but focus on, let's call it, moderation. And then at the end, they all had this very strong agreement on the importance of having value aligned capital, and they had different perspectives at how they looked at it. But on the side of Sonder, he's not building a Catholic company per se, but he needed to have VCs that wouldn't press him to do things that were, contrary to his faith. He was founding the company as he was going through his conversion process, and so he said this was super important. Jamie also thought it was very important that when he transferred Access 90 from a nonprofit to a for-profit, that the person involved, the single investor they have, was actually, like, the right person, because he didn't ever want to have some pressure to sell or to do anything. So they were all, like, really much in agreement that you need to have the right investors. So keep that in mind for your ventures. If you are taking on external capital, make sure you've got value alignment there. After that, after a short break, we had a session on scaling startups more than just surviving, and this was with Alex Jones, the CEO of Hallow, Thomas Lehrman, the co-founder of GLG, and then Tim Connors from Pivot North Capital. He actually had worked in a lot of different venture startups, or a lot in Silicon Valley, including, firms like Sequoia. So he's kind of known the best. He even told a story about one of his first meetings. I think it was with Sequoia, meeting meeting Elon Musk back when he was founding X.com, not Twitter, but the first X.com. So really, like, interesting guy, has a lot of really interesting network, and I thought his perspective was interesting, having gone up against, or maybe against is the wrong word, but having kind of rubbed elbows with all of these Silicon Valley people who, very pro tech, pro best ideas, but often anti-Catholic. This panel was moderated by Zaz Floriani from First Mile Ventures as well. Really, really brilliant individual. And this one was really. I just found this panel probably one of the best events of the summit so far. Um, there were many interesting things. Again, I might write a separate post or do something separate about this. But the one thing that really struck me the most was Alex's statement about loaves, like loaves of bread. He did this by first telling the story of their fundraising round. So they had kind of the three kind of core co-founders had put their own money in. They sold their 401, like, liquidated their 401ks, took the percentage hit, but they were got to a point where they're running out of money, so they needed to raise money. So they had, I think he said something like a list of like 80 or 75 investors who were known to be kind of in line with this like faith related or impact related investing. And they were going through this pitch. I think it was 75. It was called 75. They were going through, pre-COVID, going and visiting and doing in-person meetings. And Alex was really the person kind of going through and doing all of this. And you're pitching and pitching and pitching, pitching. And all he's getting is no, 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 no. All sorts of reasons why. And, he was just getting like really frustrated. He's like, I don't know, God, this is just, maybe I'm not the guy for this job. I think you got the wrong guy. I'll make a deal with you. And he says, if this is going to succeed, it's going to be up to you. But if it does succeed, I'm not going to ever take any of the credit for this. But on the other hand, if it fails, it's also on you. So he kind of like effectively put the ball in God's court. And then their next meeting ended up being somebody who decided to cover the whole round for them. So this investor covered the whole round, and then the other four remaining meetings also were interested in putting money in. So they had more interest in the company, in investing than they could actually handle. And he said that basically, like, the whole point is like he had to just surrender to God. He had to, quote unquote, give up. He had to put it in God's hands and allow Jesus to help him, because it was all about him before, and he was focused on his own efforts. But once he put it in God's hands, things went quickly. He kind of made this, somewhat of a joke, like, yeah, I didn't realize how practical it would be to surrender to God's will. So, just his example, he brought up many other examples similar, and he said he has like so many examples of that being the case. But I really thought it was interesting. And as he was talking about this, then he kind of brought out his zinger, which was, we are called to bring the loaves and the fishes that we have. Whatever we have, we're called to bring it. But it's up to God to multiply it. And we can't have the multiplication of the gifts unless we're willing to bring them to the table. Now, obviously, the fish and the loaves, they ultimately even do come from God, right? You can't have any of those things without the creation God has made for us, but we still nonetheless need to be willing to bring our whole self, try as hard as we can, and do the best job we can, but just put the rest in God's hands. Allow Him to multiply it as big as He wants or as small as He wants. And yeah, that to me just really is going to stick in my brain. I'm going to think about that one a little bit more. After this, we had a pitch competition, which really, really cool. We It ended up being won by Presidio Healthcare with Dan and Bob. Some people I know. I know Dan. I've had a couple calls with them. Really, really interesting company, building a Catholic healthcare company. Super, super interesting. So they won that competition. I think it was like a $10,000 check that they won. They presented that at the awards dinner. It was really cool to. I guess I've seen several pitch competitions before, or at least they weren't necessarily pitch competitions; they were demo days. But it was pretty cool to watch this and see some interesting ideas. I would say the biggest takeaway from that whole thing was stage presence, right? Everybody had great companies, really like talented individuals, but I believe personally the reason why Dan and Bob won was just like this strong stage presence, total confidence in the message they're talking about, and also like perfect command of the topic, right? They just knew their stuff. So when they were asked questions, they didn't falter at all. They listened well to the question and answered it. After that, I ended up meeting up with a praxis friend, and then after that, we finally had the kind of like concluding, let's call it dinner. There will be a brunch tomorrow, but this was kind of like the last big dinner. It's the awards dinner. By the way, sidebar: the food was just incredible. It's really, really great. But I met some great folks at the dinner table. I think this for me, we'll see how it plays out. But some of the people I met, I think, are going to be very helpful and very interesting people to have known or to know so far. And it's one of those instances where it's like it's just really interesting how God. Most of the tables were full by the time I got there because I was a little bit late, so I had to go to this table kind of over in the corner that had some seating, and ended up getting to sit next to somebody who I really enjoyed my conversation with. I think we connected well. Hopefully, we'll collaborate in some ways, and you know that's because God kind of guided me there. So feeling pretty lucky. They call it holy collisions, is what they refer to it as. No particular takeaway from this dinner, but there was a couple other things I'll mention. One, I did get to meet or encounter Jeff Scheffelbein, who's co-host of the Beatitudes podcast. If you haven't heard of it, check it out. But a lot of people have told me about Jeff and how he's the guy I gotta know. And so I had connected with him on LinkedIn and commented on one of his posts about this upcoming summit, and we had agreed to spend some time and talk together. So I got a chance to speak with him, and something I've been wrestling with a lot lately is the idea of whether or not to focus on setting goals and to really like have that emphasis on the measurement of the outcome. In particular, usually this comes up with like financial stuff, like, oh, do I want to be a billionaire, or do I want to achieve a certain kind of like level of sales, versus just working hard and letting it in God's hands. And we there's kind of two, I guess I would say there's two things that he really kind of stuck me with, if you will. One was that the only reason you have any discomfort saying things like, "Oh, I want to be a billionaire," or these other things, it really comes from if the intention is wrong, and if you're focused on the money outcome, right? And he pointed out on the other side, this is the second piece, was it is expected of us to set goals. He's like, the Bible is pretty explicit that not only is it okay to be setting goals, but it's kind of expected of you, because that's just like he referenced a bunch of things. I didn't write down specifically which verses he referenced, but it kind of stuck with me. So I'm gonna figure out how to reconcile that. But that was a really interesting learning piece there around just being willing to accept those things and to plan, and I guess you could say have that kind of collaboration with God. And if you've developed a good spiritual life, hopefully, praying and setting goals with God, and in a way that is going to honor him as well. So that was really cool to me, Jeff. I think that's pretty much everything I'll mention for today. I will be doing probably a big recap on the whole conference as a whole, and there'll be some smaller content I aim to put out. At least depends on how much time I have, but I'll aim to put out more content about some of the particular topics. Shout out to Raul, who had mentioned, who watched the last video and had a particular interest in a couple of the pieces that John mentioned around how to build a saint, the six ways that saints build. I'll work on that one for sure, because Raul is a great guy, and I appreciate him listening. So if you have something specific you'd like to hear more about from any of these things, let me know as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and God bless. We'll see you next time.